The moment my father's face appeared on that screen, the entire room went silent. My sister had just claimed everything, the house, the accounts, the legacy, and she thought she'd gotten away with it. Until I plugged in the flash drive and hit play. Hi, I'm Jenna. And for 3 years, my family pretended I didn't exist. But the truth? It had a voice, and that voice then came from beyond the grave. What my dad confessed in that video not only changed the will, it changed everything they thought they knew about me. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water, and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I wasn't sure what felt heavier, the South Carolina humidity or the silence when I walked into the house that used to be mine. The air was thick with ocean salt and something unspoken, the kind of quiet that didn't come from grief but from people who had long ago decided where you didn't belong. The walls of the Walker estate were the same cream stucco I remembered, touched up here and there with fresh paint, but no amount of polish could hide the age in the corners. The place was curated to perfection, like a magazine spread pretending to be a home. White hydrangeas bloomed on either side of the steps. A brass plaque on the mailbox still read, "The Walkers," though my presence now felt like a contradiction to that name. I hadn't been back since the night I left with 2 suitcases and no goodbye. No lights turned on behind me, no porch door cracked open. That was 3 years ago, and even now, every step toward the front entrance felt like trespassing. Elaine met me at the door as if she'd been waiting for the cue. She wore pale gray heels and a white dress that hugged her like it had been tailored this morning. Her lipstick didn't move as she smiled. "You made it," she said, voice light, the kind of light that cuts. "Hope the traffic wasn't awful." "It was fine," I answered. A pause stretched between us. The screen door clicked closed behind me, and for a second we stood in the foyer like strangers forced into politeness. The scent hit me first. Lemons and something floral, artificial, too clean. It didn't smell like Dad anymore. Inside, the house buzzed with soft voices and fork clinks. Everyone was there. Cousins, aunts, old family friends. Their chatter stumbled the moment I walked in, as if someone had turned down the volume just enough for me to notice. I passed the sideboard where Dad used to leave his car keys and his half-read newspapers. It now held a single framed photo. Dad, Elaine, and Mom at some foundation gala, arms linked, all smiles. My absence wasn't even subtle. Corinne, Mom, stood by the patio doors talking to Aunt Denise. When she noticed me, she didn't flinch. She didn't wave. Her posture simply stiffened, her head tilting just slightly as if I'd tracked sand into the room. I gave her a small nod. She didn't return it. The only seat left open was near the sliding glass doors, the one that caught the late sun. I sat there without invitation. The cushion dipped as I settled, a reminder that even silence has weight. Elaine clinked her glass, commanding attention with the ease of someone who had practiced applause in a mirror. "As you all know, Dad left things in order. He wanted everything handled with dignity and clarity," she began. Her voice rang through the room like a bell polished for Sundays. Joseph Linwood, Dad's longtime attorney, stood beside her with a neutral expression, his briefcase resting against the buffet. He opened a manila folder and cleared his throat. "The final will and testament of Russell Walker," he said, tone clipped and professional. "Signed and notarized March 14th of this year." My pulse kicked. That was 3 months ago. He was already ill by then. Joseph continued without pause. "All holdings, including the Hilton Head property, the investment accounts, and associated business shares, are assigned in entirety to Ms. Elaine Walker." No one looked at me. Not one person, not even Joseph. Elaine smiled, not broadly, just enough, like the closing move of a chess game. Someone behind me murmured, "Well, she was the one who took care of everything anyway." I stared at the iced tea in front of me. The condensation had formed a perfect ring on the linen tablecloth. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I just followed the drops of sweat down the glass like they might explain something I'd missed. No mention, No clause, no token gesture. My name wasn't even in the footnotes. The room eased back into soft conversation, relieved that the formalities were done. The performance was over. Elaine thanked Joseph, posed for a quick photo with the will, then leaned across the table to offer me a glance that wasn't quite pity, wasn't quite triumph. "Dad trusted me," she said under her breath. "He wanted someone reliable." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands stayed in my lap, curled into themselves. Later that night, the house had emptied except for the few staying over. I found myself standing in the doorway of my old room. The door creaked as I opened it. Nothing had changed. The curtains were still that faded blue with sailboats. The twin bed still had the quilt Grandma made when I was 10. I sat on the edge and looked at the bookshelf. Half of my old paperbacks were gone, probably boxed and tossed or donated, but one remained, The Secret Garden. Dad used to read it with me before bed, said it reminded him of resilience. I picked it up, thumbed the worn spine, and tried to remember the last thing Dad said to me that felt like love. Not formality, not obligation. Love. And then it came. Only sign what you'll never regret reading back. He said it one afternoon in the backyard when I asked him why he'd delayed renewing the business loan. I didn't understand it then. Now, I wasn't sure if he had either. A soft knock pulled me from the thought. I turned. Joseph Linwood stood in the doorway, tie loosened, eyes tired but direct. "There's something else," he said, holding up a plain envelope. "Your father left this. He told me. Only if you came." The flash drive was small, unmarked, but it felt heavier than the entire will Elaine waved around yesterday. I turned it over once in my hand, then again, as if the truth inside could seep through my skin if I held it long enough. Joseph had placed it into my palm with the same care a man might use to hand over a match near gasoline. "Your father said to give it to you only if you came back, not if you called, not if you asked." He didn't stay to explain, just gave a short nod and walked away down the hallway, shoes quiet on the old wood floor. I stood there in the doorway for a few minutes longer, the envelope still warm from his fingers. I didn't open it then. Somehow, I knew it wasn't something to watch in that house, not with walls that had learned how to listen. So the next morning, I drove down to the shore. There's a little cafe tucked beside the dunes on South Beach Drive. They serve coffee strong enough to make you blink and pastries too soft to last more than a minute. I used to come here with Dad when I was a kid, before the air between us got too thick with silence. Back then, he'd order a plain scone and let me have the blueberry one. Said he didn't mind, even though I caught him sneaking bites of mine every time. Now the cafe was quiet, save for the clatter of dishes in the kitchen and the occasional gull crying overhead. I chose the corner table nearest the open window and slid the flash drive into the side port of my old laptop. The screen flickered. A file appeared. For Jenna.mp4. I clicked. The image was grainy, low resolution, but the hospital room was unmistakable. Green walls, 2 white lighting, 1 IV pole in the corner, and there, in the center of the frame, sat my father. He looked smaller. Not just from weight loss, but from time. His shoulders sloped forward. The collar of his hospital gown sagged to one side, exposing a pale collarbone I didn't remember ever seeing. His breathing was shallow, chest rising and falling like each inhale had to negotiate its place. He took a moment before speaking, as if rehearsing a truth he never expected to say out loud. "Jenna," he began. His voice was gravel, barely over a whisper. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain things to your face, and I'm sorry for that. Truly." He looked off camera briefly, then back. "She brought me papers, Elaine. Told me they were just updates. Said the business accounts needed my signature after the last audit. I was still groggy, just out of that second procedure. And I didn't read them. I just signed." He paused. The corners of his mouth twitched downward like he'd tasted something bitter. "I didn't think, and that's on me." The camera caught the edge of his hospital wristband. A date, March 15th. "I know I failed you," he continued, voice fraying. "When you started asking questions about the firm's transfers, I shut you out. I thought you were overreacting, making trouble. But you were right to question me. I didn't want to admit how far off track things had gone." He sighed and rubbed his eyes, like even the act of remembering cost something. "You were the only one who ever asked me why. Everyone else just said okay and moved on." I blinked hard. My fingers stayed clenched around the ceramic mug in front of me, untouched. The tea had gone cold. "I let her tell the story," he went on. "Let her tell your mother that you were unstable, that therapy in college was a sign, that your questions were dangerous, and your mother, well, she believed what was easiest to believe. So did I." A long silence passed in the video, just the low hum of machines in the background. "I know this won't fix it, but this isn't about fixing. It's about not leaving you in the dark a second time." He looked into the lens now. Really looked. "This isn't revenge, Jenna. It's your return. You deserve to know that." The video ended without ceremony. No fade out, no signature, just a still frame of my father's hands resting limp on his lap before the screen turned black. I sat there for a long time. The breeze pushed against the edge of the laptop, flipping the screen slightly. My chest ached, not from sadness, not even from anger, from release, like something in me had finally been named after years of being ghosted in my own story. I didn't cry, not in the way you'd expect. There were no sobs, no tissue grabs, just a slow trickle of tears that I didn't wipe away. They dried where they fell, leaving faint salt lines across my cheekbones. It wasn't grief, it was recognition. My father hadn't changed in time to make it right, but he'd changed enough to say it out loud. Maybe that was all I needed. I watched the video again, and a third time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I needed to feel the rhythm of the words in my chest. I needed to memorize the weight of truth, said too late. A family across the cafe laughed over muffins. A little girl with a ribbon in her braid waved at me. I offered her a small smile, then returned to the screen. It struck me. My father had never used the word sorry. Not once in that video, but somehow it was the most honest he'd ever been. Some truths don't come wrapped in apology. They just arrive. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair. The tide was pulling out, waves peeling back from the shore like the breath before a confession. "They need to see this," I whispered. My voice was steady. My hands, not so much, but the decision had already settled into me like the first deep root of something I hadn't grown in years. I zipped the laptop shut and slipped the flash drive into my pocket, close to the place over my heart. Dad once told me, "There are truths no one wants to hear. Doesn't mean they're not yours to speak." This time, I wouldn't whisper it in my own head. I would say it out loud. "You're not listed anywhere," Elaine said, the words rolling off her tongue with practiced sympathy. "So please don't make this harder than it needs to be." She stood at the center of the family parlor, her heels barely making a sound against the polished hardwood, yet her presence reverberated like a brass bell. I had heard that tone before. It wasn't cruelty, it was performance. Around us, the air was warm with early summer light streaming through the bay windows, but the room felt cold. Relatives sat in loosely formed clusters on antique chairs and velvet couches. Their voices had quieted into a murmur the moment I walked in. I wasn't surprised. It was the same sound people made when a stranger entered a wedding uninvited. Half shock, half gossip, but no welcome. Elaine placed a leather folder on the marble coffee table. She opened it with the same reverence someone might reserve for a sacred text. "For those still wondering about Dad's wishes," she said, smiling faintly at the ants on her left, "this document has already been notarized and filed. As his executor, I've confirmed it matches what he asked of me verbally in his final days." There was no emotion in her voice, just poise, calculated and flawless. I stood by the archway, watching. Elaine's posture was straight, her chin slightly lifted. Corinne sat just behind her, legs crossed, hands resting in her lap like she'd been sculpted into silence. Joseph Linwood cleared his throat. If there are no objections, I can proceed to file the final assets. I raised my hand slightly. Actually, I said, my voice steady, before that happens, I'd like 5 minutes. Elaine turned. Her eyes narrowed, then recovered. This isn't a trial, she said lightly. Joseph glanced between us, clearly weighing procedure against decency. 5 minutes, he said, then we proceed. I walked to the console table by the television and pulled the flash drive from my bag. It was the same one Joseph had given me days before, small, ordinary, but filled with the kind of truth people either run from or regret ever seeking. I looked toward Joseph. He nodded. A few curious heads leaned forward. Aunt Diane adjusted her glasses. The younger cousin with the law degree whispered something to her fiancé. I inserted the drive. The screen came to life. The image was blurry but unmistakable. My father in a hospital bed, eyes ringed with exhaustion, voice cracked but clear. If she's watching this, he began, then I'm already gone, but I couldn't let it end this way. No one spoke. Not a cough, not a whisper. Even Elaine didn't move. He looked directly into the camera. Elaine brought me documents after the second procedure. I was confused, still medicated. She told me it was routine, just some administrative reshuffling. He paused. His hands trembled slightly, the tremor of someone whose body was betraying him before his mind ever did. I signed what she asked me to. I didn't read them, and that was my mistake. Corinne's mouth opened, then closed. Russell went on. I let her convince me you were dangerous, Jenna, that you were spiraling, but you were the only one who ever challenged me to see the cracks. Elaine took a sharp step forward. This isn't admissible, she snapped. He was clearly unwell. Let it play, Joseph said, voice firm. My father's voice continued. I regret how I handled things. I regret letting silence speak for me when you needed me to say more. A faint clearing of a throat sounded from the back row. A cousin shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't protecting the family, he said. I was protecting myself from my own shame. When the video ended, the screen froze on a single image. His face, caught in a moment of fatigue and clarity, like a man who knew he'd run out of chances but wanted to leave something behind anyway. No one moved. Elaine's mouth twitched, but the words didn't come. I turned to look around the room. The same relatives who had avoided my eye 2 days ago now sat wide-eyed and still. No one was congratulating Elaine. No one was murmuring support. Even Corinne looked toward the blank screen as if she could will it back to life. There was no applause, no gasps, just that terrible, heavy quiet that comes when something undeniable has been laid bare. Elaine glanced at Joseph. You're not seriously considering... He held up a hand. I'm considering everything, he said calmly, especially in light of what we just saw. Elaine turned toward me. Her expression was no longer triumphant. It had turned brittle. You think that changes anything? She hissed. He still signed the documents. The law doesn't care about last-minute regrets. I didn't rise to meet her voice. I looked at Joseph instead. Was there a version of the will he made before this one? Joseph hesitated, then gave a slow nod. There was. That was all I needed to hear. Elaine stepped back, as if those 2 words had knocked something loose in her chest. The room remained still, but it was no longer quiet out of avoidance. It was quiet with expectation. Not for Elaine. Not anymore. Elaine didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her silence throbbed like a warning, stretched taut across the dining room like a wire just shy of snapping. The same room that had once hosted Christmas brunches and anniversary dinners now carried a strange, echoing quiet. The light from the tall windows had turned late afternoon gold, brushing over the long mahogany table where no one touched their drinks. A few untouched wine glasses caught the sunlight and scattered it in fractured glints across the white tablecloth, like tiny broken things no one was ready to clean up. Elaine stood at the head of the table, her arms crossed tight, lips parted but still. I remembered a line she once threw at me during an argument years ago, back when I was still naive enough to think we were just two sisters trying to make different choices. "You never needed proof," she'd said, just a louder voice. "But look where silence got you." Now it was her silence that spoke volumes, a brittle quiet, the kind born of disbelief disguised as poise. "I know what that video looked like," she finally said, each word clipped. "But we all know Dad wasn't thinking clearly. He was medicated. He'd just come out of surgery." Joseph remained seated across from her, hands folded neatly on a yellow legal pad. He didn't flinch. "I had the footage analyzed yesterday," he said. His speech was coherent. The timestamps align with the day after his final consultation. He wasn't on sedatives by then. Elaine narrowed her eyes at him. "And you just believed it?" "I verified it," Joseph replied evenly, "as your father instructed me to do in case of any dispute." The words landed like soft hammers, steady, dull, undeniable. Corinne hadn't spoken. She hadn't so much as moved. She sat next to Elaine, but angled slightly away, her eyes downcast, fingers resting over her wristwatch as if she could check the time without actually looking. She didn't defend me, but she didn't defend Elaine either. Her silence no longer felt like strategy. It felt like absence. A low voice broke the hush. "It sounded like Russell," Aunt Denise murmured. "Sounded like he meant it." Someone else, an older cousin maybe, nodded. "That was his voice. No one's doubting that." Elaine's mouth twisted, and for a second, I saw something unguarded in her. Not anger, but fear. And underneath it, something sadder. The kind of sadness that comes when the script you've memorized starts unraveling and you don't know what lines come next. I kept my voice soft. "Joseph, was there a version of the will he made before this one? Something that wasn't pushed in front of him after surgery?" He looked at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but readiness. "Yes," he said. "There's a prior version, signed and notarized in early 2021. It's stored in our Charleston archive. Your father never formally revoked it." Elaine stood abruptly. Her chair scraped back with a harsh squeal. "This is a witch hunt," she snapped. "I was the one here every week. I handled everything when he got sick. And now you're acting like I manipulated a dying man?" "No one's accusing you of anything," Joseph replied calmly. "But we owe it to the estate to verify the chain of documentation. That includes reviewing previous drafts." Elaine looked around the table, as if expecting someone, anyone, to chime in. But no one did. Not Aunt Denise. Not the cousins. Not even Corinne. And that was when she realized she was alone. Her heels struck hard against the wood as she turned and walked out, the echo of her exit stretching longer than her presence ever had. A few moments passed before anyone moved. Then Aunt Denise stood, walked over to me, and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her voice was low, warm. "I always knew," she whispered, "but it wasn't my place to say." I didn't trust my voice enough to reply. I just nodded, hoping that was enough. That night, the house settled into its usual hush, the kind that used to make me feel invisible, but now just felt tired. I sat in the study with a printed transcript of the video in my lap. The pages were wrinkled at the corners, marked up with a pen I'd found in Dad's drawer, his old favorite, the one with the green cap. My eyes drifted over the same sentence again and again. "You ask questions no one else dared to ask." That one line. I circled it, then underlined it twice. Not because I needed the emphasis, but because I needed the reminder. In families like ours, silence was the thread that held everything together. You didn't ask. You didn't press. You accepted the way things looked and learned to love the absence between people like it was a gift. But I had asked. I had pressed. And even though it cost me, even though it broke whatever comfort I had left, I didn't regret it. Because silence might hold things together, but it also hides the rot. I folded the transcript and slid it into the back pocket of my journal. The room was dark now except for the desk lamp, which cast a thin halo of light over the edges of the page. That's when my phone buzzed. A single message, one line, from Elaine. "You'll regret this." No name, no punctuation, no warmth. Just a digital echo of the voice that once told me I'd never last outside the family's shadow. I stared at the screen a long time. Then I clicked the phone off, set it face down on the desk, and let the room go quiet again. But this silence wasn't hers. It was mine. The document was aged, the edges curled slightly, and the corners marked with the faint gray of finger oils and time. It smelled faintly of cedar and ink. Handwritten notes lined the margins, arrows, small corrections, and one checkmark beside a sentence near the middle. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my father's. Sharp, imperfect, and strangely honest in a way his voice rarely had been. I sat across from Joseph Linwood in his office on King Street in Charleston. The walls were lined with legal books that looked like they'd never been touched. A fan whirred in the corner, spinning slow circles against the hum of the central AC, which did its best to fight off the late summer heat bleeding in through the glass. Joseph wore his usual navy tie, neatly knotted, though I noticed his sleeves were rolled halfway up for the first time. It made him look less like an attorney and more like a man simply trying to do the right thing in a world that often made that difficult. "This version," he said, carefully unfolding the will and placing it on the glass table between us, was signed in March of 2021, notarized the same day, stored per Mr. Walker's instructions, and never revoked. I leaned forward, letting my eyes trace the faded lines of the signature. The ink had faded slightly, but the strokes were unmistakable. That loop in the W. The way he always pressed harder on the final R, Joseph didn't speak right away. He gave me time to absorb it. When I looked up, the board liaison was already seated beside him, flipping through the supplementary forms. "It allocates the Hilton Head property jointly to you and your sister," Joseph said. "Investment accounts are split, though the majority of the growth accounts are assigned to a trust." I nodded slowly. "There's also a foundation clause," the liaison added, tapping the lower section of the will. "A fund established in your father's name to support girls pursuing STEM education in South Carolina." My heart skipped. That had been my idea, something I'd mentioned to him years ago over coffee, back when I was still fresh out of grad school and full of belief that we could use wealth for good. He hadn't said much that day, just nodded and asked what kind of programs I'd want to support. I thought he'd forgotten. "He kept it in," I murmured. Joseph nodded. He did. Elaine wasn't present. She'd sent a formal withdrawal letter to the firm 3 days ago, citing severe emotional distress and her intention to step away from all family-held operations indefinitely. I wasn't sure if she'd written it herself. It didn't sound like her. Too clean, too resigned. But she didn't show up. And that, more than anything else, felt final. Legally, the falsified will was nullified. The video and metadata had more than satisfied the board's threshold for coercion. Joseph didn't gloat. He simply read the decision aloud with the same tone he might use for any other client. "Do you want to contest the structure?" the liaison asked me gently. "You could request full sole executorship given the circumstances." I shook my head. "Number, I don't want it all. Just the part that's mine, and the part that matters." He nodded and made a note. "One request," I added. "The foundation. I'd like the name changed." Joseph looked up. "To what?" I exhaled slowly. "The Russell Walker Second Seat Fund." He tilted his head slightly. "Second seat?" "My father used to say there's always room if someone's willing to scoot over." I smiled just a little. "But some of us never got invited to the table. This fund should help someone pull up their own chair." He didn't ask more. He just wrote it down. Later that evening, I returned to the Hilton Head house one last time. It was quieter than I remembered. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It just felt like what remained after the performance ended. I went to the garage, not even sure what I was looking for. That's when I found it. A wobbly wooden chair pushed behind the old paint cans. It was dusty, missing one screw on the front leg, and the seat had a faint crack running through it like an old vein. It was my grandfather's. He used to sit in it while whittling birds from blocks of pine. As a kid, I'd sit cross-legged nearby, pretending to be patient, watching his hands move with a quiet steadiness I never appreciated until now. I pulled it out, wiped it down, and carried it inside. In the living room, I found Dad's toolbox in the hall closet, still neatly arranged. I grabbed a screwdriver, a few screws, and knelt beside the chair. Tighten the back legs, sand down the crack, anchor the frame. It took time, longer than it should have, but that wasn't the point. As I tightened the last screw, I heard his voice again in my head, something he said not long before things started unraveling. "Don't wait to be invited," he told me once. "Build your own table." He'd meant it literally back then. He was showing me how to use a level, but now I heard it differently. The chair didn't wobble anymore. I stood it up, sat down, and felt the weight of it. Not just wood, memory, intention. I didn't need to lead an empire. I didn't even need to win. I just needed to make space for myself, for someone else. When I got back to the rental that night, I opened my laptop to check on the paperwork for the trust. A new email sat in my inbox. Subject line, Inheritance and Justice. Can you help me? The name wasn't familiar, the message was short. I clicked it open, reread it twice, then sat back. Something had shifted, and this time, I wasn't the only one trying to be heard. Jenna didn't want applause, she wanted space, for others like her to breathe. The old cottage still creaked in the morning, especially when the breeze came through the kitchen screen door. She liked that about it. It reminded her that even the quietest places had a voice, if you listened long enough. Late summer light poured through the windows of her grandfather's former study, now her home office. She'd left the original wood paneling untouched, just sanded and stained. The long table in the center, oak, built decades ago, had been re-leveled with new legs. Around it, folding chairs and mugs of warm tea, filled with stories in progress. The women gathered there once a week, not clients, not applicants, just women. Some younger, some older, all shaped by the same invisible wounds, the unacknowledged, the erased, the ones who'd been told it's complicated when they asked why their names weren't on deeds, titles, or thank you cards. They called themselves the Second Seat Circle. A small part of the foundation Jenna had launched just a month ago. The Second Seat Foundation wasn't just a nonprofit, it was a resource hub. Legal support, mediation referrals, workshops on estate law, and the thing Jenna valued most, story space. A place where people could speak freely about what had been taken without being told they were overreacting. At this week's meeting, 4 of them sat around the table. Talia was the newest, barely in her 20s, sleeves pulled down past her wrists, fingers twisting the edge of a paper cup. "I just kept thinking," she said, voice soft but steady. "Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I forgot something, but I was the one who stayed. I dropped my college classes to take care of Dad, and after he passed, my uncle, he just said, 'You'll get your life back now.' But the will, it was rewritten 3 months before, and my name wasn't in it anymore." She looked up quickly, bracing herself. Jenna didn't flinch. She leaned forward, hands folded. "We start by believing you," she said. "That was all. No theories, no suggestions, just truth." Talia exhaled, and something in her shoulders shifted. Beside her, Marta, one of Jenna's former students, took a gentle breath. She now ran operations for the Charleston branch. Another woman, Deja, offered to walk Talia through options for filing an affidavit if the hospital records aligned with her story. It was quiet work, but it was the kind that held. As the conversation moved forward, Jenna stood and walked to the side wall where the wooden chair sat, the one she'd repaired by hand just weeks ago. Its legs were, even now, the crack on the seat sanded and sealed. She hadn't placed a cushion on it. That would have made it ornamental. She wanted it honest, raw. The women noticed her pause. Jenna rested her hand on the top rail and looked around the room. "This," she said, "isn't just a symbol, it's a promise. No one here waits to be invited. We're building tables and offering chairs." She didn't need to say more. They understood. Later that night, after the women had left, she cleared the mugs and folded the chairs back against the wall. The light outside had dipped into a burnt orange hue, casting long shadows across the floor. The cottage smelled like ginger tea and pine wood. She stood at the sink for a moment, watching the breeze nudge the lace curtain. Her phone buzzed on the counter. One new email. Subject, Invitation to Speak, National Conference on Women in Law and Equity. She blinked. The name was familiar. One of the panel organizers had reached out weeks ago asking for an informal call. She hadn't followed up. At the time, she wasn't sure she wanted to step back into the arena of microphones and eyes. She clicked the message open. "We'd love to have you keynote. The impact of the Second Seat Foundation is being noticed. Your story, if you're willing, could be the turning point for many." Jenna read it again, then once more. Her reflection in the darkened window looked calm, not powerful, not victorious, just grounded. She walked back to the table, sat in the repaired chair, and typed one word, "Yes." Then she hit send. The chair creaked softly beneath her, not from strain, but from use. Outside, the crickets had begun their evening rhythm, steady, unapologetic, a sound that didn't ask for permission to be heard. And Jenna, for the first time in years, didn't feel like she had to prove her place. She'd made it, and now she was making room. When I placed that old wooden chair at the head of our table, I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just wanted to make room for someone like me who once didn't have a place. In life, some inherit titles, others inherit silence. But I've learned that legacy isn't what we're given. It's what we choose to pass on. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can offer isn't an answer. It's a seat and the words, "You belong here." If this story reminded you of a time you found your voice or helped someone else find theirs, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to share your thoughts or simply pass this along to someone who might need that reminder too.